lace up those cleats and put on those mitts. It's time for another exciting edition of our Little Yankees podcast. Stepping up to the mic, it's the OLIP team.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome inside the inaugural episode of our Little Yankees podcast, also known as OLIP. I'm Julian Coltre with my good pal Josh Levin.
How you doing?
And we're gonna break down the Yankees. And I think the fact of the matter is, you might say, why do a Yankees podcast right now? You know, the season's over. It's about to be the long off season, but I know I speak for myself, Josh, when I say the way the season ended, Boone's terrible management in Game 2, and the entire build up to this season, culminating with the way that it ended, just has me oozing with feelings that I need to be able to put my thoughts back out there. And what better way to do it in the 21st century than with a podcast?
I agree. I felt the same way after Game 5 ended. I went right to you, texted you, and I was like, I need to get all this stuff off my chest about not just this game, but the series and the season as a whole, and even, you know, the team and the state of the team. So this is a good time, even though the season just ended.
And the fact of the matter is, I mean, definitely from my perspective, what better way to vent than to talk to your friends about the sort of stuff that you think that the Yankees and what I think the Yankees need to do. And you know what? We're no strangers to talking about the Yankees between you, myself, and our unnamed third member of our so-called broadcast team, who we hope to have on this podcast in the near future. He, quote unquote, works overnight, so he's not able to do the podcast with us on this inaugural episode, but we're hoping to have him later. But between the three of us and all our other friends that we like to talk to the Yankees about, we have a lot of thoughts. We have a lot of deep down feelings related to the way that the season ended, just as I'm sure a lot of Yankee fans do. So, you know, over the next couple of episodes, and as we keep doing this podcast and we keep broadcasting, I think Josh and I and our third man are going to do what every other Yankees podcast does, which is give our thoughts and break down what we love and what we don't love, and, you know, get a little weird with it as well, and, you know, talk about and do some of the gimmicks that me and Josh and some of our other friends have coined within our own group chats, and try and, you know, make those things exciting for those who follow either the podcast or follow us on Twitter or do any of the other stuff with social.
Absolutely. And, you know, the season ended almost a week ago already. So I don't know about you, but I got a lot to say. So I guess we should get going, right?
That was what I was going to. My first question to you would have been whether you're listening to this on the day we're recording it or you're listening to it a couple of days later. It's been around 7 days. So hit me with your feels, Josh.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't want to break down Game 5 so much because it's old news, and I don't want to go back to the Game 2 decision that sort of seemed to be the turning point. I think overall as a whole, it's just more frustration with the team and a little bit with the organization. You know, it's all been out there and discussed over the last week, but there's a lot of things that I think could be fixed or changed or tweaked. And I hope that they, you know, the Yankees, Brian Cashman and the front office are able to recognize some of the issues. You know, the hot topic has been the balance in the lineup between lefties and righties. I think everybody, you know, that's like the first thing everyone goes to pretty much the last 3 years with the postseason exits is this team can't hit right-handed pitching because all their hitters are righty power guys. That was the big topic yesterday at Brian Cashman's press conference too, and they asked Aaron Boone about it as well. But, you know, even more than that, not even so specific, I just feel like there's something missing with the team. We all, as fans, we love the players, you know, on an individual basis. We pretty much love everybody, you know. But sometimes you have to start to ask yourself, you know, this is the third straight disappointing postseason exit. We can't even talk about 2017 because that one, for one thing, was so long ago. Yep. And two, it was totally out of nowhere. It came from nothing. But the last three have been so disappointing. And you have to start to wonder, does this team have what it takes to not just get to the ALCS, but to get to a World Series and to win the World Series? And I think it's at the point now with this group where you have to start to ask those questions. So that was really what was on my mind as Game 5 ended. And it was even on my mind before the playoffs started during that losing streak. And then at the end, when they fell off, after the 10-game winning streak, they fell off again. And I know this is something that the two of us have discussed. So I know you feel similarly to me.
I think, like anything else, when you have other things that occupy your time, you forget about it and it goes by the wayside. And obviously for both you and I, given the fact that you and I obviously watch other sports, we love football and fantasy football, which is going on right during the middle of the playoffs and right during the middle of the World Series. And just the fact that we have lives outside of the Yankees, it, I guess, lessens the blow, so to speak, a few weeks later, or a few days later, in this case, a week later. But that doesn't mean that I don't think, and I know you agree with me, that the way this season ended is any less true a week ago than it is right now. And
yes, just less fresh.
Yeah. And we kind of went through the so-called 7 stages of grief after it happens, with bargaining and acceptance and anger and sadness, maybe some more than others, E-Ray. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the stuff I think you and I said the night of is stuff that is true. And you hit the you hit the nail on the head with righty bats. The fact that the Yankees have relatively zero interest in wanting to go out there and at least over the last 3 seasons, sustain lefty bats that hit for power at Yankee Stadium, which is a major advantage for a ballpark that you're going to be playing half of your games in over the course of the year and playoff games. And you could say that didn't really matter because they were playing at Petco, which is not Yankee Stadium and doesn't have the short porch, so that who really cares? But when your only lefty bats are Mike Ford, who every single person in existence said, what the hell was Aaron Boone doing putting him into the game for a pinch hitter, and Mike Tauchman and Brett Gardner, 3 guys who don't hit for lefty power really. And let's be honest, 2 out of 3 of them, take your pick which 2 out of 3, one of them is Ford, but the other could be Tauchman or Gardner are not consistent hitters. I feel like you're playing at a disadvantage. And then the bullpen, it's funny because 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, if you and I had this conversation, we would have looked at the Yankees bullpen in the same way, on paper at least, as the way the Rays bullpen is looked at right now. And from pretty much the moment that Adam Ottavino, fell off last year and got so overworked that he stunk, and going into the playoff series against Houston last year, they've been terrible. Chapman, we all know now, has a history of blown games. Britton is good, but he's probably really the only guy. Chad Green, it's 1 year he is, 1 year he isn't. They sorely missed Canely, and Ottavino's a no-show. And, everybody else, whether it's Nick Nelson or Luis Sesso or Jonathan Holder, it's like you can't rely on them in a pinch. So, those are just the 2 things on the surface. And you and I, whether we want to now or later on in a different episode, can get into, what we think about Boone and what we think about Cashman. And honestly, we might get into it a little bit later just because it has to do with what you talked about yesterday with the press conferences. But, those were the 2 things that, at least off the top of my head, you looked at and you were like, man, these are the 2 reasons that the Yankees not only lost this, but they failed to even address it, especially after Canely went down, because the bullpen imploded from that point on, and they couldn't get outs in the regular season or the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, the bullpen, I think personally, going into 2021 needs to be completely reworked. I think we saw this year that, the best bullpen in baseball no longer resides in the Bronx. And you went through the issues with specific names. I think it's time that the Yankees try to look into, changing up the way they construct their bullpen. I don't think they need to maybe take a page out of the Rays books. They don't need to follow strict rules. I think it's way more effective if you have, 5 guys out there that you can trust. And out of those 5, you have 3 that you could trust to close a game, or put in the biggest situation the way Nick Anderson came into Game 5, in the middle innings. you would never see the Yankees do that with Chapman. The only reason they did it in Game 5 as early as they did was because they couldn't squeeze an extra inning out of Cole. So I think that when you pigeonhole relievers into these strict roles and spots, or as Aaron Boone likes to call them, lanes, you put yourself at a slight disadvantage. And on top of that, the bigger issue is the lack of pitchers that they have that they could trust in 2020. Chad Green was one of those guys that they could trust, but we knew this year he just wasn't as good as he was in the past. And Chapman barely got any work this season. Britton was really good, though.
I think it was like 10 days before the division series before he had even pitched.
Yeah, and then
Chapman, that is.
Yeah, and then he didn't pitch at all. He didn't pitch at all in Cleveland, and then he didn't get into the DS until Game 4, I believe. So he barely pitched this year. But the point being is, I think it's time to shuffle that around a little bit. I don't know if you're going to be able to trade Chapman because of how much money he makes. But something like that could probably help, as crazy it is to say, because he's one of the best. But, I think they have to start to look at and start asking themselves some hard questions. In the past, it's been, well, we like what we have. We're close, as they like to say. But now, 3 straight years of this, you have to start to ask yourselves, what do we have to do to get over the hump and to, they say they're close, but what do we have to do to actually be close? Because they're not as close as they think,
And it's funny because what did everybody say yesterday and I think it was Boone who said, we're as close as we've ever been to winning a World Series. It's like, no, as close as you've ever been to winning a World Series was when you weren't manager. It was 2017 when you were within 1 game of clinching and going there. Since you've been there, you had 1 last game in the ALCS and you lost twice in the division series.
Right. And that's what I was going to say is when we brought this up, I was going to say, the quote was, it's important to realize how close we are, was what he said. The closest they've been to the World Series with him as the manager was 2 wins shy of the pennant. So that's not that close. They've actually, in all honesty, they've never been further away from the World Series than they were under Boone in 2020. I know they made it to Game 5 in the DS this year. In 2018, they only went to 4. But the point is that the regular season was so bad, and the only reason they were in the playoffs was because the playoffs expanded. So you could argue that, I don't think there's any argument, actually. This is the worst season they've had in the 3 with Boone.
I agree.
To get closer, they need to do some things and they need to change some things up. And the bullpen is one thing that I would look to, especially if you're going to be under a payroll crunch, which they seem to be, facing this year because of coronavirus, but also because of the Cole contract and the Stanton contract. You can't pay relievers $15, $16 million a season. I think that is a poor use of money when there are guys, who could fill those roles that make way less than that. That'll make less than $1 million a season. I don't want to use the Rays as the thing to look at because not everything that they do is perfect. And let's be honest, they're a win away from getting to the World Series, but they haven't won anything either.
Yep. And they've never won one. So as good as they've been, it's like, they're good right now, but you're always better when you're the hot thing on the front page right now.
Exactly. But Cashman did say yesterday that right now they're a better franchise than we are. Yeah. So maybe that means you have to look towards them and take some bits and pieces of what they do and mix it into what you do.
I agree. It's funny you mentioned that, specifically the Rays in their bullpen, because earlier today when I was driving in the car, I was listening to WFAN and I heard a caller call in the afternoon show and say what I think a lot of Yankee fans have been saying, at least over the last week, which is you need to do a more complete deep dive into Brian Cashman. And we're guilty of it. We love Cash, like every Yankee fan does, because the fact of the matter is, outside of the stretch in like the late 2010s or mid 2010s when they, had the Ellsbury contract and, they were winning games, but they weren't making the playoffs, he's had him a contender every single year. But the guy said, specifically the bullpen, give me a deep dive into the 20 years that Brian Cashman has been GM or so, and find me good bullpen pieces that have been put together not through spending money with free agency, but rather in a ways that the Rays have done it, which is building these stable of guys that throw 98 through their farm system. And I don't know, off the top of my head, I was like, all right, let me think of this. Dylan Betances came from the Yankees farm system, obviously. David Robertson, Chad Green, and I mean, I'm blanking right now. I think I had one or two more when I was thinking about it earlier today. But 5 guys in 20 years who you can, and Jabba, I guess, Jabba too, who you can really just say, like, these guys were phenomenal. And not just that, but phenomenal at one time. It's like, yeah, Phil Hughes was great for the year that he won them in 2009, but it's like Phil Hughes wasn't in the bullpen with 4 other guys who you also could rely on to get outs. And as good as their bullpen is supposed to be on paper, not a lot of those guys are homegrown good guys, because we know that Luis Cessa is fair at best. Jonathan Holder is fair at best. And the guys that are supposed to be good, Britton came from the Orioles, used to be a closer. Chapman, we know, came from the Reds, is a closer. Canely, White Sox system guy, I'm pretty sure. If he didn't come up there, he might have been a Yankee to start, but wasn't there when he really hit his cusp. And then the rest of Ottavino and guys like that are not homegrown players. So for me, I would really love to see, especially with the bullpen, like start having these guys that throw 98 and maybe aren't your blue chip starting prospects, but are damn good blue chip pitching prospects for your bullpen who you can rely on and will paint the corner and get those calls and get guys out, like what the Rays are doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's what the route you need to go is young, cheap, controllable arms for your bullpen. We all love, we are spoiled because we had Mariano Rivera, and the Yankees have tried to replicate that since he's retired 7 years ago. They, Robertson was the closer for a year, and then it was Miller, who was an expensive free agent signing, and then it was Chapman, who was a high profile acquisition from another team, and then was another, signed as a free agent again after the Torres trade. That's what they like to do because they want to make sure they have somebody at the end of the game who can lock it down. But I think baseball is moving away from that. And, do we want to have one expensive reliever? That's fine. But we don't need an entire bullpen, of these expensive signings, Chapman, Britton, Ottavino. You're seeing it, how it hamstrings you payroll wise, especially if one of them like Ottavino hasn't worked out. It wasn't a good signing. It hasn't been. And I would expect that he'd be traded in the offseason.
Yeah. For me, it's like, can we really go out there and say every single signing that Brian Cashman has made for the bullpen is bad? No, you can't do that. No. Because honestly, Soriano, when they signed him, was a good signing. Britton was a trade, but they re-signed him. I don't know, for 2 years he's been above serviceable, and he was great as a closer when Chapman was out with COVID earlier. Chapman's been good, and they got Glaber from him, so he really is a plus. But I will say Ottavino is butchered, but it's like, why spend all that money?
That's the thing. And the reason why is because they don't have the arms in the system to come up and insert them. They've tried it. They tried it with Loizaga. They've tried it with Holder. They've tried it with Cessa. Chad Green was one success story, but the rest of them, the book is very much open on all of them, and partially closed on Holder and Cessa, I would say, at this point. And we couldn't be too happy with what we saw from Loizaga in the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, that's the signings paper over the weakness, within the farm system, within the organization, and that's the pitching process in general. I think is something that needs to be looked into because it's not just the bullpen,
No, I agree.
And the rotation has been an issue for years, and it still is one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we kind of especially move through doing the podcast in the off season, we'll probably talk about what the heck they're going to do with the 4 guys who line up behind Garrett Cole, and whether or not Severino is a realistic option for 2021, more than just second half of the year. Let's see what he is, which guy coming back from Tommy John, that's pretty much all you can expect. And whether Armand's going to be any good, or, if they can sign a pitcher, do they re-sign Tanaka? Do they get somebody else? Can they trade for somebody? Is Trevor Bauer a realistic possibility? But they have a lot more, and this is what we said, a lot more questions than they have answers.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why in 2017, and you put this so perfectly, so I'll let you sort of to round it out, but it's like after 2017, you felt so good going into the core of this team, and now you just feel so bitter and so slighted, and it sucks. And this is really your philosophy, so like I said, I'm gonna let you take it away with this, but it's like they didn't win anything in 2017.
Yeah, I think, as fans, we were so excited about that run because we didn't expect it to happen. We figured that was a year or two away, and it happened quickly, and it was extremely fun to watch. And the following year, they acquire Stanton, and we're thinking, all right, we went to Game 7 of the ALCS. Mm-hmm. We're so close. We added the MVP of the National League to our Rookie of the Year of the American League, to our future budding our budding ace in Severino, our stud catcher in Sanchez. And 2017 was sort of this thing that we held on to. And I think even, we held on to it in 18, which is reasonable because it was it was only the season prior. And I think we kind of held on to it again in 2019. Because we still think of these guys as so young and their careers are just beginning. And in 2020, it's time to let go because
I agree.
It's, it's this thing that we cling to as if it's a World Series championship, and it wasn't even a pennant. And we want more. We expect more as fans, and we know we can get more because these players are really good. They have a very good team, but it's not good enough. And that's why it's time to start to let go of the, the baby bombers. They aren't the baby bombers anymore. The window is 3 years more, maybe 4.
Mm-hmm. And Judge is what now? 29 almost?
Next season, he turns 29 in April. Sanchez turns 28 in December. Gleyber's still young.
Yep.
But Greg Bird's not here anymore. Severino has barely pitched in 2 years. And he'll be 27. Mm-hmm. So all these guys who were babies and were so young, they're not anymore. And there's nothing to show for it. And I think that's what's frustrating as fans. And I would love, I'm not going to sit here and say that the organization doesn't feel this way too, because obviously it hurts them more than it hurts us because it's their livelihood.
Yeah.
But I feel that there needs to be more of a sense of urgency. And it kind of circles back to what we were talking about before with the pitching issues. Yesterday at the press conference, Brian Cashman basically acknowledged straight up that in the Game 2 pitching decision, that fiasco, he didn't give Boone enough good options to win the game. And he sort of alluded to the fact that he didn't make any moves at the deadline as the reason why the pitching was so thin. And one of the reasons why they had to, they thought they had to go to the Garcia Happ plan. And, I feel, that Cashman says the asking price at the deadline was too high for relievers and starting pitchers. Oh, okay. But if not now, when,
Yeah.
And this
Think
is
of what they have in their minor league system. If they realistically, let's just say they wanted to get Josh Hader. Don't know if he was available. Don't know if he even inquired about it. But you can't tell me that if you need a bullpen arm and you think that your bullpen is going to be your weakest link, that between Andujar and Clark Schmidt and everybody in your minor league system outside of Jason Dominguez, that can't get you a high-quality bullpen arm.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be Hader. That's just the guy that you go to because he's one of the best. But there were guys out there, Archie Bradley, for one, who was traded that, I find it hard to believe the Yankees couldn't have come to an agreement on getting a guy like that. And the thing that really bothers me the most is, what? I can live with the inactivity. I can live with it if you're trying to sell us that these prospects are what they're supposed to be, what they're advertised to be between Davy Garcia and Clark Schmidt, and in a lesser extent, Michael King. I can live with it. But in the playoffs, Davy Garcia pitches 1 inning. That's it.
Yeah.
So he's too good to trade, but he's also too good to pitch in the playoffs. And that's where they lose me completely.
Yep. I agree. Absolutely. And the final point before I guess we put this to bed and move on to that press conference that you and I have kind of alluded to is in 2017, we thought they were coming up. How many years since then have they been the best team in the American League? And the answer is none.
0.
With the core that they have, 2018 was Boston by far. They had a historic year, and they were better than the Yankees. Last year, probably make a case that if it wasn't them, it was Houston, and it probably can be made that they were Houston, given the fact they had the best pitcher in the American League with Garrett Cole. They had Justin Verlander, who continued to turn back the clock. And yeah, the two teams might have been close, but the Yankees didn't have home field advantage.
They beat
them.
them.
Didn't make the World Series. They beat them. And then this year, it was Tampa. So the 3 years of this unbelievable, we have the best core in baseball core, the baby bombers growing up, and they're going to win multiple World Series. Not one of those years have the Yankees gone in with the best record in the American League, or even arguably, I know sometimes records don't shake your way, but even arguably, have they been the best team in the American League?
They haven't been at any point. And the playoff track record proves it.
I agree. Absolutely. So moving on to the press conference, what I want to do is I pulled up some of the quotes from Boone and from Cashman. And I want to do a little true or false with you. I'm going to read you the quote, and you tell me whether or not you think that's true, and if it's true, why, and if it's false, why. So the first one that you and I kind of talked about a little bit is the manager reiterated how close this team is to winning a World Series. True or false? They are close.
It's false. I mean, I guess if you want, it depends how you define close. Okay, because they're in the playoffs, so I guess that means they're close compared to teams who aren't. But in realistic terms, they're not close, and they haven't been close. And we spoke about it before, so I don't need to go into it again completely.
Yeah, I agree.
The one thing that I will add to what I said before is that at this point, it's a little tiring to hear Aaron Boone say stuff like this. This isn't the first time. This isn't the first, post-mortem press conference he's given where he's used a similar quote or a similar sentiment. They're not close. No, the fans don't want to hear about it because they're not, and the fans know it. You can't trick us. The New York fan base is too smart. And I would rather some honesty. I would rather him say, it bothers me that we're not close enough, because otherwise it comes off as you're okay with this continuing to happen, which I know he isn't. I know he isn't.
I agree.
But it's not what the fan base wants to hear.
Yeah. And what's the idea that you say, we had a great year and a lot of players had great individual success, but we did not accomplish our ultimate goal, and therefore that was a failure this year. You don't have to say, oh, well, the whole season wasn't a failure because, so many people were great. No one cares about that. They care about winning a World Series, and whether or not you want to cut it or not, that was a failure this year, and they had an inability to get that done. So, I agree with you. What else really needs to be said? The next is Boone noting that he still has plenty of confidence in Gary Sanchez. So it's not, I guess it's a two-parter. True or false, Gary Sanchez will be the starting catcher next year. And the second parter is, do you still have confidence in Gary Sanchez?
So I'll answer the second part first. I don't. And you know that last year, 2018 and 2019, you bashed him, and I defended him always. And I defended him this year too, until probably, I don't know, end of August, beginning of September. I don't have any confidence in him. And I think part of it is the fact that the Yankees have tried to play with his defense so much. They've tried to change so much about the way he plays the position that it's affected his offense. And to sit here and say that I expected him to be a 275 hitter and hit 30 homers and 100 and drive in 100 runs every year, I didn't. I didn't think that would be what he was, but what he has become is very below our expectations. Yeah. And I personally think that all the drama pretty much every year about the pass balls and should we bench him, should we not? I just think it's gone too far. And so to lead into the first question, I actually don't think he will be here next year. I think he's going to get traded. They tried. It was reported today they tried to trade him in August, but there were no takers. I think they will find a team to take him in this offseason. They're not going to get what they probably could have gotten 2 years ago when it was Sanchez for Real Muto straight up as a rumor. But I think it's done. I think his days here are all but done.
He's below average defensive catcher. He is now a league average, or a little bit worse based off of how you go with this season, hitting catcher. I know a lot of the Gary Sanchez apologists will say they know what his ceiling is, but his ceiling is the roof, as Michael Jordan would say. He hasn't reached that ceiling in 3 years. I don't want him here anymore. And all you need to know is the last 2 games of this playoff series, Kyle Higashioka, with what he did behind the plate, catching those balls for Jordan Montgomery and keeping those pass balls from happening, and what he was able to do with Garrett Cole in framing pitches. If it's not Kyle Higashioka's job next year, it needs to be somebody who can catch the damn ball, because when I looked at the Rays and what they were doing behind the plate and defensively throughout the fields, saving runs at this point is just as important as scoring runs.
Yeah.
And the Rays are proving that. And that's why Gary Sanchez is a liability, that alone. And he can't hit anymore. So when we get into the actual offseason discussion about who they can replace him with, that's when we can talk about whether it's Higgy's job or whether they, see if one of these young kids that they have in the minors, I know they're so far away, but maybe one of them click, or they for a year, or maybe it's JT Real Muto. But whoever it is, we'll get there then. But I also agree. I think he's toast. I think the way that they benched him those last 2 games, there is no way that he is the starting catcher in 2021.
I'll just add one more thing to that.
Yep.
If they're going to bring him back, which I still think is a possibility, they should let him play his game, meaning stop messing around with his mechanics in the field. Just let him play the game, because I think that will lead to better offensive results, which at this point, you need to get one of the positives out of him. If you're not getting any, one is better than none. So if he's back here, just let him play. Stop messing around with, the intricacies of the position. Just let him play the position and let him hit.
Okay. Gleyber Torres' defense was brought up with Aaron Boone. We all know he's not that good of a shortstop. So true or false, your starting shortstop next year will be Gleyber Torres?
True, I think. I don't think so. Small sample size, 60 games. Obviously, we know there needs to be some work in the offseason on the defense. He didn't look good at all this year. He just didn't seem to have the instincts to play the position, but he's so young still that I don't think that they will give up on that yet. I don't think 60 games plus the playoffs is enough for them to say, all right, it's time to move on. If you remember when Didi first came here, he was not good in the field in the beginning, and he was rated as a good defensive shortstop, which is why he was brought here. And he struggled for a while in that first season, and then he finally sort of turned it around in the summer. So I don't think they will give up on Gleyber yet as a shortstop, but he definitely needs to tighten it up in 2021.
I agree. I think there are options. If you were to tell me that Francisco Lindor was going to be your starting shortstop in 2021, then I would be like, move Gleyber Torres to second base. But he came up through shortstop in the system. He says that's his position. Maybe he just had the yips. After all, he was taking over for Didi, who was a very good defensive shortstop and made all those routine plays, especially when he really found his own with the Yankees. So I think you can ease him into it. I actually would have liked that. I remember reading an article a few days back that said that the Yankees should have kept Didi because they could have, A, had a lefty bat, but B, they really could have eased Gleyber into a part-time shortstop job, so he could have gotten a more everyday look at playing that position at Yankee Stadium and in big time games. But hindsight's 2020, and I doubt, given the rumors of their financial demise due to COVID, that they're going to go out there and make a big trade for a guy like Lindor or really do anything out there. I did see a couple of potential trade candidates in an Andy Martino article that you and I will talk about in a few minutes, but at least for right now, I think Glaber's going to be the guy. My next question will bleed into Brian Cashman's one big quote, which was a lot of questions about game 2, obviously, for Boone. And Boone said, I think the room understands that I'm the one writing out the lineup and making those decisions. To which Brian Cashman then mentioned that Aaron Boone is, quote unquote, not a puppet, and he has never ordered a manager to do anything. So, true or false, Brian Cashman orders Boone what to do, and Boone is a puppet. Do you believe them, face value, buy or sell?
I know a lot of people won't believe it, but I do. I don't think the general manager or anybody in the front office is getting in touch with the coaching staff in the middle of a game to tell them, okay, pinch hit this guy or warm up this reliever, take this guy out in this moment. I don't buy into that. I think a lot of the stuff is discussed before games or before series. In the case of this Rays thing, they play out pretty much. I'm sure they play out every scenario and decide, okay, these are the things that we think may happen, and this is how we want to best attack it. If anything, I think they're guilty of forgetting that these guys are human and not they're not walking math equations, basically. So I don't think he's a puppet. I think Boone has the freedom to do what he thinks is best in games, but I think the information he has is given to him by the front office. So if you can't say he's a puppet per se, but you can say that he's influenced by the front office. And that's what I think is what goes on down there. I just think he has made some wrong decisions. I don't want to put the blame on game 2 on him, because I think that was an organizational mistake that he's kind of the front man to take the heat for. But some of the other things that you'll see, the Mike Ford pinch hitting appearance in game 5 is the one thing that comes to my mind right now.
And that will come to everyone's mind.
That's his decision. Exactly. That's his decision, and it was a bad one. I don't think anybody is telling him, okay, here's where you need to pinch hit, and it should be Mike Ford.
Mike Ford in there. Yeah.
Exactly. The problem is that the players, in this case, Mike Ford, isn't good enough for that job. So I don't think he's a puppet. I just think that maybe he makes some bad decisions, and maybe he doesn't have enough good players.
Now, what I will say is that is sadly an indictment on Aaron Boone, because the fact of the matter is, if he is not getting analytical decisions mid-game, that means he is a piss poor mid-game manager, because every single playoff series he has gotten destroyed by Alex Cora or AJ Hinch or Kevin Cash. He's better than the terrible managers that they have, at least in game, or he's better than the managers that they have in game when he's playing the Twins or when he's playing the Indians. I mean, granted, it was not Terry Francona who he was going up against in this series against the Indians. So that's what's more concerning. And Cashman already said Boone's back next year. Hal Steinbrenner already said Boone's back next year. So then something's got to give, because the fact of the matter is, if he is the one penciling in the lineup, if he is the guy who's expected to face the big decisions when it comes to what he's going to be doing, then I expect him to manage in game better. And that cannot happen if the Yankees are going to win a World Series, because every other World Series manager, I don't know, maybe Dave Martinez aside, I don't know how you value him as a manager. I know a lot of people in DC don't love the managerial stuff that he does, but he's a little bit more of an old school manager. They didn't really use analytics when they won last year. If they are going to be analytical, then Aaron Boone has to get a hell of a lot better at it.
I agree. I think he's good enough in the regular season because there are enough bad teams that it doesn't really matter. The Yankees will win their fair share of games. We've seen it. 2020 aside, we've seen them win 100 games in the first 2 full seasons Boone had. When it comes to the playoffs, like you said, he gets outmanaged by managers who are better than him. And the fact is that that's the reality. So how do you make up for that? Well, hopefully he gets better. But if he doesn't, then you need to make it less likely that he'll make a mistake, which means the players have to be better. So the only thing that I would add to this is that I think in 2019 he was better than he was in 2018, and in 2020 he took a step back to sort of what it was like in 2018. So hopefully that is because it was a short season, and we'll see what happens next year.
And not because they lost Carlos Beltran.
Exactly.
See, but that's what you hope. But who knows? Maybe he'll be the next Yankee manager because he never got to stick with the Mets, and he'll have served his 1-year suspension or whatever you want to call it, if even though he didn't really have to. My last one of these is something you and I talked about very briefly at the beginning of the pod, and that was lefty bats versus righty bats. Cashman was asked about the lineup being too right-handed, and what he pretty much said was that they simply can't not re-sign people like DJ LeMahieu or not have a guy like Luke Voit on their team because they are right-handed. There has to be better alternatives. So true or false, the Yankees will get more lefty bats this offseason.
So I think what Cashman said is accurate. You don't let DJ LeMahieu go. You don't trade Luke Voit just because you want to put a lefty in their place. That lefty would have to be better than them. Are you going to find a better left-handed hitter than DJ LeMahieu is a right-handed hitter? I doubt it. Are you going to find a better first baseman?
And he plays all the field too, so
exactly.
He can hit for power as a righty to left to right field.
He's not the problem. The problem is that the other right-handed hitters are too similar. That's Voit, that's Stanton, that's Judge, that's Sanchez. So anyway, you're not going to find probably not going to find a better first baseman than Luke Voit. So I agree, but I do think that they can change things. I think if you talked about it at the beginning, the 3 lefties they had this year, Gardner, Tauchman, and Ford. Gardner will probably be back, which at this point is fine with me.
Yeah.
The other 2 can be improved upon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think they can make some changes, is maybe not adding lefty bats that are everyday players, but maybe it's we improve our lefty hitting outfielder, and it's somebody better than Mike Tauchman, and we get a better power hitter to take Mike Ford's place, that he can play first base, that can DH sometimes. Maybe if you find somebody who can play the outfield too, or another position. That's how I think they could improve the handedness. And, if anything, that's what I would expect. I wouldn't expect, like you said, I wouldn't expect trades for these guys.
I'll give you one name, though, Michael Brantley.
So, I think that he's somebody they should sign. And we have to look at this in a vacuum because we don't know if he would even be interested in playing here.
And here's the thing. As we get further in the offseason, when the rumor reports come out and the winter meetings happen, we'll probably have a good idea. But right now, I would take him.
Yeah, and I think what he could do is sort of platoon with Clint in left field next year. And he's a left-handed hitter who's not a power guy. He's a gap hitter who hits 300, gets on base. He's had injury problems in the past, which is something we're all too familiar with.
Typical with their out.
Exactly. and he's in his 30s. I think he's 34. So it's not a no-brainer. There are some questions, but I think that's the type of move that you make where you say, okay, we're not getting rid of Judge, we're not getting rid of Clint, but we're adding Brantley to the mix. And you look at the Rays. Sorry to go back there again, but you don't need.
But they're the best team in baseball right now, so you have to.
Exactly, and the Dodgers do it too. You can mix guys. Just because they're an everyday player doesn't mean that they actually play every day. So
I agree.
You could find playing time for Michael Brantley.
All right. So on that note, since we're talking about things that the Yankees should do this offseason, I think you and I will make a point of it and getting into a little bit more in-depth analysis as we continue doing this pod over the next couple of weeks. But there was an article that came out today from Andy Martino, and the idea of the article was that the guy the Yankees have been talking about trading, which obviously has been Luke Voit for a majority of the last couple of days, is the wrong guy, and that rather than trade Luke Voit, they should trade Gio Urshela. And his justification pretty much was that as good as Gio Urshela is defensively, the idea that you can move Gleyber Torres to third baseman where he would be a little bit more, I guess, covered with the issues that he is currently having at shortstop, given his range and some of the errors and the lack of ability to know to cover the bag certain times. And that Urshela obviously has as high a ceiling right now as Voit, given his defensive prowess and the fact that the last 2 years he has hit exceptionally well. And then I think some of the names he gave, I think Brandon Crawford was one of the names to play shortstop. And long story short, you would move DJ to second base and you would keep Voit at first base. And that was his so-called fixer-upper. So I have my opinions on it, but I'll let you start. Is this a trash idea from Andy Martino, or would you buy it?
So I disagree with it. I don't think you. So Gio's a strength at third. He's a really good hitter. He's turned into a really good hitter, and we know what he can do with the glove, despite what the metrics say. I don't buy into that with him, because the eye test tells me that he's very good at third. He's one of the best third basemen in baseball. It happened out of nowhere, but it is the case.
Chapman, Arenado, and him. Those are the three best defensive third basemen in baseball, in my opinion.
And Machado.
And Machado, yeah.
And for me, I'm not moving that. Defense is important. And if we have an issue at shortstop, why are we going to move the issue to third base, another position that he doesn't have much experience playing? I believe he did play. Glaber did play there in the minors a little bit, but he has no.
He's not A-Rod, who was a good shortstop and now is going to be a good third baseman.
He has no major league experience at third. He's barely played shortstop in the major leagues.
Yep.
If you were going to move him, you would move him back to second base where we saw him succeed in the major leagues. So that's one of the reasons why I don't like it. And the other reason is, how are you replacing the production from Gio? If this guy is an all-star, which it seems to be the case, and if full season he'd be an all-star, you don't just get rid of that for the sake of handedness. It's sort of the Luke Voit. It's the Luke Voit argument too. Do I think that they should look into the trades? Sure, why not? Because maybe somebody blows you away with something crazy. But you're not getting rid of a guy just because they hit right-handed. You have to figure out ways to add to it rather than take it away. So I personally, I'm out.
Yeah, I thought the article was trash. I didn't like the justifications. I think, especially with defensive metrics, sometimes these people come up with the best way to quantify things that matter a whole lot into something that matters so little. It's this idea that one stat tells you all you need to know when, like you said, the eye test clearly tells you, especially the last 7 games in the playoffs, that Gio was unbelievable at third base. That the plays he made, whether he was on his butt or his knees or charging in for a ball or diving or turning double plays or saving runs, could not be quantified in a couple of defensive metrics that really, at the end of the day, are just glorified numbers. And here's the thing. Sabermetrics is good for a lot of things, but this, I don't believe it is good for it all. And then I think you also take into account that, I do want them to make a trade if it means improving, but I would much rather it be Voit, because Voit does not really give you that idea of defensive safety behind you. He's a good first baseman. I don't think there was at any point during the year that I said to myself, man, this guy stinks at first base, but it was never like, whoa, I have Mark Teixeira level defense at first base. And so from that perspective, you sell high. It's like a stock. You sell high in hope that, you know what, if he turns out to be as good as he was this past year for another team, that stinks. But if you were able to improve yourself, that's good. And the fact of the matter is, of all the righties, and you mentioned it before, a lot of them are the same, he is the only one you're going to be able to trade right now. You're not trading Giancarlo Stanton with his big contract. You're not trading Judge because he's your starting right fielder. And as far as an all-around right-handed bat is concerned, when he is on, he's your best. And Gary Sanchez is literally zero value. He's less value than Stanton, because at least Stanton, despite the injuries, is an MVP. And, somebody somewhere could put that bat in his lineup. I mean, somebody somewhere could put Gary in their lineup, but not for the price that you'd be asking for in terms of a trade. So Voit, to me, makes the most sense as far as what you're going to be doing with the trade and what you might be getting from that perspective. So, if they explored doing that, if they were able to kind of figure out what it is that they needed to do in order to enjoy having some form of a completer lineup, I think that would be worth it. And look, here's the fact of the matter. I saw a statistic a few weeks ago before the playoffs that was like the last 4 or 5 World Series champions have been teams with low strikeout rates in the regular season. Yankees are not that, as we know. Even if this year, statistically speaking, they were middle of the pack with strikeouts, they have guys who strike out too much. They struck out, 18 times, major league record in the series against the Rays during those games. So I would much rather have Gio, who at least I think will put contact on ball, will not be prone to the big strikeout in a way that Stanton and Judge and Voit and Gary all will be. And that's what I want to load my lineup with.
Yeah.
That, to me, is what makes the most sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're trading somebody, Voit makes the most sense. One, because his value may never be higher.
Yeah.
And two, the defense isn't the biggest plus. So if you're going to trade somebody, you'd want it to be somebody that you think you could maybe replace a little bit easier. I don't think Gio is that guy. I think, like you mentioned, Voit is very similar to the other right-handed hitters, and Gio isn't. So it doesn't make sense to me to remove a guy who's more of the type of hitter we're hoping they add more of. So, yeah, I completely agree with you.
All right. So as we wrap up here, and like I said, we're hoping to do at least one of these a week and be able to pump out some good episodes to get into the off season and be able to, enjoy talking Yankees baseball and have a platform where next time we're frustrated over their early American League Division Series exit, we actually have a place where we can vent to the fans and to Yankees Twitter and all that stuff. So Boone used to call the season a failure, and he said they were close. That was his word. So let me ask you, one word to sum up the 2020 Yankee season, or maybe even a phrase. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say one word. It would be disappointing. There were sky high expectations going into spring training. The pandemic happened and we lost most of the season, which we thought would be a good one. It starts and they look great, and then they don't because guys get hurt again. And when those guys come back, they start to win, and you're like, okay, maybe this is, maybe this could be something. But at the end of the day, it's the same story that it's been in 2018 and 2019, not coming through in big spots, pitchers and hitters. And so the only word that I can use to describe that is disappointing. The expectations were not met, and they were not even close to being met.
So to me, and I agree with you, and I think that's the perfect word, my one is oversight. They unintentionally failed to be able to do this because they thought they were better than they actually were. Yeah. And I think that it plays into everything that happened in this past offseason after they signed Garrett Cole. They refused to do anything else. They were pretty much like, hey, $300 million finishing move, when really that was the starting move to completing your quest for a World Series. And then it was the oversight to not get a bullpen arm when they could have gotten it at the trade deadline, or get a good bat that maybe could have come off the bench as opposed to these career minor leaguers and Mike Ford, where it was the oversight to try and get way too creative because they thought they could out-analytic the Rays in Game 2 and in the American League Division Series. The Yankees self-sabotaged themselves by their failure to address needs that they didn't think existed due to the fact that they looked at this season as they were there. And as we mentioned, they have not been there for 4 years because they have not been the team with the target on their back. They haven't won anything. They haven't even been the best team in the American League. So to think that just by signing Garrett Cole and then having injuries happen again and thinking that these guys who, yeah, were great last year will be great again, that's oversight. And it falls on Cashman, and it falls on Boone, and now is their chance to correct it. And they'll get the offseason to do it, and you hope that they don't have to cheap out because of coronavirus, because we're already going to have to hear about how this was a 60-game small sample size. I don't want that to play into why 162 next year is going to be a cheap fest because they didn't do anything in the offseason, because then next year oversight will once again be it, or frugality will be it because of their lack of desire to pay.
Yeah, and I think sort of along the lines of what you said, another way to describe it would be that they are they were way too confident in themselves. Listen, they have to be confident. No team or pro athlete is going to succeed if they don't have confidence in what they're doing. And same goes for a front office executive or a manager. But to sign Cole and sort of have this victory parade that he was the final piece, the finishing touch, and then not really do anything else in the rest of the offseason or during the season at the deadline. Oversight is a great word for it. And it's, I just hope that they learn from the mistake. That's all I can say.
Absolutely. And you hope that going forward, they're able to do something to at least improve the squad. So as we go forward with the podcast, next couple of weeks, I know we're going to be on the lookout for any rumors that might be hitting. Obviously, the World Series is going to be on. So, who do you think? I'll give you the chance since we're talking about it. Who do you want? Who do you think?
I want whoever wins the NLCS to win the World Series. Obviously, I think any Yankee fan would probably say the same thing. Yeah. I think the Rays are going to win it. I really do. They just seem to be clicking on all cylinders. Even during the Yankee series, which they had to go to the fifth game to decide, they seemed in control pretty much the entire series, and they seem in control against Houston too. And I think they have everything in the world to match up with either of the teams that come out of the NL. They have the pitching, and they have the defense, and they have the offense. So I think the Rays will win it.
I agree. Absolutely. I want the Dodgers, think they deserve it. Think Mookie is a finishing move for them, unlike Garrett Cole for us. Let them finish off the Atlanta Braves and give Clayton Kershaw his ring that he so rightfully deserves. So anyway, like I was saying, as we finish up here on the podcast this week, we're going to really want to be able to go and do what we need to do in order to keep pumping out episodes and keep talking about the Yankees, and hopefully they give us some reason to be excited during this offseason. But Josh, it was a great first podcast, and looking forward to bringing on our little co-host next week for our little Yankees podcast.
Thank you. It was great. And I look forward to continuing this and to growing it, and a good avenue for us to get our thoughts out into the world.
I agree. Absolutely. Till we see you folks next week, we will catch you around.